the director of the Netherlands Institute in Turkey. I've been so since 2006. And when I first arrived, the keys of the institute, so to speak, were handed to me by an elderly, very active, talkative, engaging, and extremely knowledgeable gentleman. This was Machiel Kiel, who was my predecessor and who would come to Istanbul upon his retirement from a professorship at the University of Utrecht. Machiel Kiel died on the 29th of July of this year at the age of 87. During his lifetime, he was of great importance for the study and preservation of the cultural heritage of the Balkan Peninsula, and therefore it seems fitting to briefly commemorate him at this symposium. He was born in 1938 in a small village in the Netherlands, and he seemed bound for a career as a craftsman and didn't stay in school long enough to obtain a high school diploma. Through on-the-job training, he became a stonemason and found a job as a stonemason at the multi-year restoration project of the old church in Amsterdam, going on throughout the 1960s and well into the 1970s. This manual work on historical architecture was to become one of the formative experiences for his later career. Another key experience came in 1959 when at the age of 21 he traveled with some friends to Greece to work as volunteers on a restoration project of the historical waterworks at Ioannina, followed by an overland trip through Yugoslavia. This awakened a fascination for the region that stayed with him for the rest of his life. When in 1976 a work accident forced him to stop his work as a stonemason, he turned to his studies, making use of an option to enter university by passing special qualifying exams meant especially for people without a high school diploma. He studied history, art history, and Turkish at the University of Amsterdam and obtained a doctorate at Utrecht University with a dissertation on art and society of Bulgaria in the Turkish period. By the mid-1980s, when he finished his PhD, he had also been on a number of lengthy research journeys through all of the countries of the Balkan Peninsula. He had taught himself Serbo-Croatian and Bulgarian, and he had become an expert at reading Ottoman and deciphering the handwritten Ottoman used by 16th century, 17th century, 18th century bureaucrats in their administrative documents. On the slide you see from one of the reports that he would write up for his funding agencies how he traveled in 1972, but he made a number of these lengthy research trips starting in the 60s, throughout the 70s and into the 80s. All this accumulated knowledge put him in a unique position to study the Ottoman centuries in Southeastern Europe. His Turkish colleagues were generally unable to tap into local networks and scholarship, and probably lacked the drive to visit their objects of study firsthand. And his Bulgarian, Albanian, Greek, and Yugoslav colleagues didn't have the access to the Ottoman archives in Istanbul and Ankara. All of this took place, of course, before the fall of the Iron Curtain. He set out on a project of systematically publishing about the Ottoman Balkans, town by town, region by region, and this took up much of his long career as a scholar. Until well into the 1980s, Machiel Kiel would spend lengthy research periods at the Netherlands. Until well into his 80s, Machiel Kiel would spend lengthy research periods at the Netherlands Institute in Turkey to work in the Ottoman archives, to study documents related to the towns that were still on his list to publish about. The large majority of Machiel Kiel's numerous publications deal with a single particular town. You just see some examples from a website of the Turkish version of the Islam Encyclopedia, which has 127 entries by Machiel Kiel, all on individual towns in Southeastern Europe. And his working process stayed basically the same throughout the decades. Firstly, repeated visits with photographic documentation and where possible in conjunction with measurements. We just saw a plan that Rosita showed us of the church in Arbanassi. Secondly, archival studies of tax registers, censuses, patronage documents, etc. And then thirdly, a publication about the Ottoman history and monuments of a particular town, describing demographic trends, ethno-religious makeup of the urban population, economy and craft production, the role of significant elite families and their links to the imperial capital, and religious institutions and their architectural legacy. He wrote about mosques, bathhouses, public kitchens, schools, churches, and monasteries. For Niš, for example, he showed that the town had about 1,400 inhabitants in 1498. In 1516, the population here had grown to about 1,800, of which some 75% were Muslims. Leather tanning and shoemaking were important economic activities, and the town had at least 3 mosques, 2 bathhouses, and public kitchens. One of the mosques was built under the patronage of Bali Bey of the powerful Malkoçoğlu family. And you see it here, photographed at 2 occasions by Machiel Kiel, before and after restoration. Census records of the 18th century show further growth of the population to about 3,000 people, and now the city also included a small Armenian merchant community. An outbreak of the plague in 1837 wiped out a large proportion of the population. Just to show you another example of monuments he recorded here in Niš, and some of the other Ottoman monuments he recorded in other places here in Serbia. And this one. This approach that integrated the material remains that are normally the realm of architectural historians with the written sources and integrated the material remains that are normally the realm of architectural historians with the written sources and their quantitative data that are traditionally the realm of socioeconomic historians, is something that has become much more common in recent decades, but that Machiel Kiel developed at a time when it was still quite exceptional. He was a pioneer in this respect. Perhaps his unusual, let's say his sideways entry into academia, allowed him to explore research avenues that many of his colleagues at the time didn't see. Perhaps it was also his adversity to generalizing narrative, grand narratives, sort of textbook architecture histories dominated by center-periphery relations, or about black and white accounts of Ottoman oppression and local subjugation. He felt strongly that the architectural history and the administrative data on economy and demography showed that the period from the 14th to the 18th century was generally a period of growth, of development, and artistic blossoming in southeastern Europe. And he brought this message across through the countless case studies that he wrote about, rather than through contributions to bigger theoretical debates. The Netherlands Institute in Turkey maintains a digital archive of Machiel Kiel's photographic archive. Many of the monuments that he photographed, you just saw already some examples, in the 1960s to 1980s, have since been modified, restored, or destroyed, making the archive a valuable resource for study. It can be consulted online, although the current interface needs some technical updates. What is currently online focuses on the traditional Ottoman buildings, but there are also a large number of scans or photos of post-Byzantine Christian heritage, and even though they were not the primary focus of his research, he photographed these also systematically. Machiel Kiel was quite a character, and I think Rosita and others can confirm that. And many people, myself included, were very fond of him, even though it was always completely clear to me that he had zero interest in what I was doing, prehistoric archaeology. It was always a great pleasure to spend time with him and hear about his research and his adventures, the adventures that he got into throughout his fieldwork. Those are now over, but his work will continue to inspire new generations of historians of Southeastern Europe. Thank you.
When we started the first symposium in Haarlem, I had, of course, contact with Professor Tjurkner from Leiden University. He's specialized in Turkish history. And he said, well, do you know there's one famous architect, scholar from the Netherlands called Machiel Kiel. So I started to dig into his history, and we have been spending about, I think, 2 or 3 months in discussing with Machiel himself and with his now widow, with his daughter in Haarlem. And we tried to convince them that Machiel should come from Bonn, where he lived, to our first symposium. And he was prepared, but in the end, his surrounding, his widow, now widow, and his daughter in Haarlem were saying, well, I'm sorry, but he had to be accompanied by, if he's coming by his widow, by his wife, and etc. It's perhaps better to forget about it. And with some sorrow feelings, we did. One peculiarity is this picture to the right. It has been published also in our newsletter, I think, of the Sultans still, that picture. When we got it, we had the idea that this is a nice picture. And then Machiel Kiel himself said to me, well, this is not a pose or something. No, I was discussing with some people about a new project, and then suddenly the all came from the air on my shoulder. So it's not, it's really happened like that. Okay. And if you see the eyes of the owl and the eyes of Machiel, you see the combination of something really beautiful.
Thank you.